Live across Warrington. Your voice, your station, your community. 1332 AM. Radio Warrington. Radio Warrington.
Hello and welcome to The Culture Show with me, Andy Green.
And me, Brian Spooner.
Now, opening the show there was Three Little Birds by Bob Marley. A song he was inspired to write, apparently, after three little birds, canaries, or so I'm told, pitched up at his windowsill one morning at his home in Jamaica, and they were singing sweet songs and melodies pure and true. Now, I think our guests in the studio this week can relate to that story because they both too have a great appreciation of nature and of our feathered friends. Is that correct?
Certainly true, yes.
It is correct.
Yeah, brilliant. Because in the studio with us are Paul Richardson and Dave Wilson of Leigh Ornithological Society, which, for people who don't know, is bird watching. That right?
Very good, correct. Yes.
Yeah. Not twitching, because as we were talking about off air before the show came on, it's quite different. But Leigh, and it's not just Leigh, is it? Because you cover Warrington, Bury.
Yeah, quite a big area, really.
It's north of the Ship Canal, east of the M6, west of the M66, is it? That's right.
So that's quite a large area,
it includes
isn't it?
large parts of Bolton, part of Warrington, Wigan, Worsley, but mainly on Leigh. Mainly it's Pennington Flash and areas around.
Yeah. Now, I saw a poster for the group when I was walking around Pennington Flash, advertising. I think you had a talk on one evening. And I thought, bird watching, it's... Mm-hmm. When you go around Pennington Flash, you see the little... What are the huts called? Have they got
the hides, yeah.
Hides. Mm-hmm. There's a number of them there, aren't
yep.
there? And it's clearly a popular pastime.
It is.
And it's not just, obviously, consigned to Leigh, is it?
And talking about pastimes, anyone that's listening in tonight, if they've got any questions or comments to make, contact us by email on air at radiowarrington.co.uk and we'll try and get answers for you.
Super. OK, Dave?
You mentioned Pennington Flash straight away, Andy, and the reason Paul is here with me tonight talking to you is because of Pennington Flash.
Because Paul's quite a new member, isn't he?
He is. But the history of the Flash, for people who don't know Pennington, it didn't exist as a flash in the 19th century. All the old Ordnance Survey maps for the 1880s, 1890s, have got Haybrook going from Abram towards Leigh, then it becomes Pennington Brook and goes into Glazebrook. There's no sign of a flash. But in certain winters, there'd be serious flooding.
Right.
And in the early part of the 20th century, the floods never went away.
Is that right?
And so the Flash, a huge area, bigger than it is now, that came into being.
So it just self-sealed? Self-sealed?
That was mining subsidence, basically.
Yeah.
And the whole thing sank.
Mm-hmm.
So the water stayed?
Yes, it's one in a line of flashes from Wigan through Lightshaw to Pennington and Astley Flash, which got filled in many years ago.
Yeah, it's a fascinating, and it's a lovely place, isn't it? Have you been to Pennington Flash?
Yeah. I mean, there must be quite a high water table then around there.
I reckon so, yeah. And of course it varies a lot depending on how much rain we have. The water levels seem to vary very quickly too. At the moment, it's really high. Yeah.
And does the water level have any effect on the type of birds that are around?
Oh, definitely, yes.
It can affect breeding birds. If we have a very wet spring and great crested grebes have nested, the nest can get flooded out.
Right.
But by and large, it soon goes down, it soon rises.
So is Pennington Flash the spiritual home of Leigh Ornithological Society?
It is.
I'd say so, definitely.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah.
You see, the forerunner of the L.O.S, the Ornithological Society, was a group formed in 1938. And it was about protection, because the Flash, there were shooters of the Flash, anything that came, the government would dispose of it, bitterns, leeches, petrol, anything. But also the coal board were chipping in at one end of the Flash, the north-western corner, and Leigh Corporation was tipping refuse at the other corner of the south-eastern corner. And so we get the forerunner of the L.O.S is the 1938 meeting.
Of what group was that then? What were they called?
Well, the local naturalist group.
Okay.
Just 4 people.
Right.
And I'll just read about, if you could excuse me reading this, Andy. This is the origins of that group. we've expressed, or it's been expressed before, that it's a wonderful place for wildlife. And I write in a book also about Pennington, with such a superb site on their doorstep, it's not surprising that a few of the residents of the town should have taken a passionate interest in what was and remains one of the region's most important bird haunts. And the earliest landmark in a history of continuous concern by local naturalists was a meeting on the 29th of September 1938. It was called by Tom Edmondson. There's a flash, when you went to the flash, there's a Tom Edmondson hide. The other three were Frank Horrocks, there's a Frank Horrocks hide, Tom Durkin, who unfortunately died in the war, and a fourth person who went to work in the shipyards in Barrow. But Tom Edmondson and Frank Horrocks stayed with an interest in the flash for a long, long time. The staggering piece of information is that the motivator of this, Tom Edmondson, was a 15-year-old schoolboy.
Really? At
Leigh Grammar School. And talking to Tom in later years, we must have sat at the same desks and had some of the same teachers.
Yeah. So, but the hides that are there now are named after these people who really instigated the whole
that
society.
Was a movement.
But yeah,
these are just legendary figures to people like me, who never met them.
Yeah, because Paul, you've been a member for 7 years.
7 years or so, yeah.
Obviously, Dave, you were a founding member of the Leigh Ornithology Society in 1971, I think it started.
71.
Yeah, but it's obviously it's history. It's developed from this group that started it all those years ago, in 1938.
I think that something that's worth saying is that today's bird watchers, a lot of them tend to be obsessed with seeing things and making lists. Yes. The people we're talking about now, that never cropped up. It was a love of the place,
the environment,
the edge of the town.
Yeah.
And their love of the flash is manifested in their writings, because Tom Edmondson was a fantastic prose writer, and Frank Horrocks and Tom Durkin were poets.
Wonderful.
Now Frank, he worked for the council on repairing roads, and people might think of him as ill-educated, but he was terrific. He had a fantastic knowledge of classical music, Beethoven, Schubert, Dvorak, the whole lot. But in his spare time, before the age of television, he wrote little bits of poetry.
Have you got any snippets there?
I've got 3 little pieces, one from each person, and the listeners can judge. Can they feel the emotion that's in these few words?
Please read it. Yeah.
Tom Edmondson, first of all, he writes in 1954, he submitted articles to Leeds Journal for years, and in his final article before he moved to Chester, he's asked about what does he remember best about the place. And he's got an association with Chatmoss as well as Pennington. But his final line is this, quite simply: in future years, when flicking through the pages of memory's notebook, I shall always remember the spring of 1954 and the sight of 30-odd exquisite black terns floating and swinging in the air against a backdrop of colliery headgears and mill chimneys. Now, everything he writes, his prose, is absolutely superb. Tom Durkin and Frank Horrocks didn't. They turned to poetry.
Okay.
And Frank's poetry, very, very simple, very, very brief, but very, very meaningful. He yearns for spring. If you're a naturalist, you're a bird watcher, that's the season, because that's the time when migrants appear from Africa or from southern Europe, and we have bird song from March, April through until the middle of June. And Frank yearns for spring. He writes 4 verses, what it's like in summer when the song is finished, and autumn, and then for winter, just 4 lines, thinking back to spring, the spring days. Days like these I shall remember, when, in days of dull December, in dashing rain and sleety snow, my heart will yearn for April's glow. And he leaves it at that. He doesn't elaborate, he doesn't need to.
Wonderful.
But then we come to a sad little digression, because Tom Durkin is in the 8th Army in North Africa. And then he moves into Italy. And he writes to Tom Edmondson, he corresponds regularly, but he's a poet as well. And I can remember in the 1970s, before the Flash was so popular, at dusk, in the twilight, you could sit alone at the Flash and look out and just enjoy the atmosphere of the place. Yeah. Well, Tom Durkin did the same thing. He's in Italy, and he's writing poetry about his homeland. About coming back home. Yeah. And he has this to say, describing a twilight night at the Flash, when you can't make out the bird, you're not sure what they are because the light's poor. And his verse is quite simply this: sitting by the Flash in an evening cool, watching various waders in a nearby pool, whistling wings I hear rush by, I see silhouettes in a fading sky. Now, that's from the heart. The great tragedy is that Tom dies in Italy, and the coincidence of tonight is that he died on the 21st of June 1944.
Goodness me.
Which is 75 years tomorrow.
Well,
just a fortnight after D-Day.
Well, I think we should dedicate the show to him, shouldn't we?
Well,
we should.
I never met him, Andy.
Yeah.
I knew Frank Horrocks and I knew Tom Edmondson very well. Well, what a sad story. A local lad dying to come home, writing in to Tom Edmondson, I'll soon be back.
Longing for home.
But it never happens.
Awful.
What I would say is that when you read some of Dave's postings on Facebook, his prose is just up there with Tom Edmondson's and the poetry and the prose there.
Get a snippet of that later.
Oh, yes.
In the studio with us tonight are Dave Wilson, founder member of Leigh Ornithological Society, and Paul Richardson, who's the conservation officer. Now, Paul...
And not to be called Twitch, as I might add.
Yeah, what's Paul, you were saying before the show started, there is a difference between how would you describe yourself? An ornithologist?
Well, if I'm being posh, I say an ornithologist, but otherwise a birdwatcher.
A birdwatcher. Yeah. But a twitcher?
A twitcher is something subtly different. And some birdwatchers get a little bit upset if you call them twitchers.
Okay.
Twitching is a very particular occupation. Dave?
And there are also moochers. And you can't beat a good mooch. It's walking to the countryside, discovering what's there. It doesn't have to be birds, it can be other things. The butterflies and the moss and the dragonflies, the wildflowers. And so the society, although it is a bird society essentially, the members have got a massive range of interests and skills in different aspects of Mother Nature.
Okay, well, before we move on to that then, twitchers though are...
You still want to know what twitchers are?
Yeah, I'm intrigued.
A twitcher will go anywhere to say he's seen a bird and put a tick on a piece of paper or in a book, and he'll enjoy doing it. And good luck to him.
The essence of twitching is, you've got a source of information somewhere, and these days that's usually either a WhatsApp group or Facebook.
A source of information where somebody says there is such and such a bird in this area.
Lapland bunting at Spurn Point in Yorkshire.
Okay.
So if you're so minded and if you're able to do it, you might even drop everything and not go into work that day. Jump in the car, maybe with a couple of mates, motor over to Spurn Point and see the Lapland bunting if you're lucky.
So is it a little bit like train spotting, where years ago you used to list your trains that you'd spotted?
A little bit like it, yes.
Yeah.
One classic example, I think I've got it right. A friend of mine mentioned a chap who'd been to the Scilly Isles and come back, got to Penzance and heard that there was a rare bird at Thurso in the northeast of Scotland, and he went. He drove to tick it off. Now, that's a twitcher.
That's a twitcher.
The other poignant story about twitching was that there was an American bird, I think a needle-tailed swift, if I remember rightly, sighted on the Isle of Harris in the Outer Hebrides a few years ago. And a few people got there in time. It's a long journey and a ferry journey to the Isle of Harris. And a few people got there on time to see it. And some of them didn't arrive till after dark.
Right.
And they found it the next morning, but it was lying dead under a small wind turbine.
Oh, what a shame.
So twitching doesn't always work out.
No, but the actual society itself, founded 1971, which is nearly 40 years ago. You're a registered charity.
We are.
That's right. And its aims are to further the studies of birds in the field and to assist in their preservation, to cooperate with other bodies in the maintenance and management of local areas of ornithological or natural history importance, because I think, as you're alluding to there, it's not just bird watching.
That's right, yeah.
You know, you care a lot about the environment, and you're not just, there's not just bird watchers there as well. You were telling me in summer people are looking for insects and things as well.
It tends to happen naturally because in high summer things do go rather quiet bird-wise. There's a huge busy period sort of from about the end of March to about now, really, isn't there? That's right.
That's right.
And now all the birds are busy feeding their young, or they're doing other stuff, and the trees are all covered in leaves, so you can't see them very well anyway.
Okay.
So your attention very easily wanders to things like dragonflies, butterflies, moths, even flowers and plants.
So, a typical day at Pennington Flash, I mean, how does it work? When I went to Pennington Flash, I saw people in the hides, but would you spend a full day there? Or?
I wouldn't.
No?
No.
Some people would.
I'd be mooching somewhere.
But people do go there.
People who sit in hides for a very long period of time tend to be photographers.
And there's some fantastic photographs being taken, isn't there? Yeah.
That's a big spin-off.
Yeah.
The standard of photography among members, including Paul here, is absolutely superb. It's wonderful.
And is that you're waiting there to capture the perfect moment, really, is it?
It can be, yes. I mean, you might be waiting for a kingfisher for 3 hours, and you only see it for about 30 seconds if you're lucky.
Yeah, so you've got to have your eyes peeled, I guess.
Yes, you do.
Yeah. So the other thing as well that you do is you record bird life in the area, and the area, as you've said, stretches from Warrington, Winter Hill and beyond.
It does.
Yeah.
Triangles Arc, Winter Hill.
Yeah.
Recording.
Go on, Paul.
Recording is something that we do try and encourage people to do, because there is a Greater Manchester local record centre where you can actually submit records very easily now online. So you take your little notebook out with you, and you actually make a record of what you see, even the common things like house sparrows and finches and so on. It doesn't have to be rarities.
So,
and then when you come back home, you go online and you record what you've seen. So then it's there. And if the patch that you're looking at is threatened with development or is threatened in any way, then those records are there to prove what value it is for wildlife.
Because there's some unique species there, and
they may be unique, or they may be important declining species which are not necessarily unique to any area, but they're important because they're disappearing, like things like skylarks.
Well, that brings me on to the next. It's not a piece of music, this, although I guess you could call it a piece of music. Dave, you brought in one of your CDs, and you wanted me to play a couple of tracks from it of birds that were once in this area, but no longer are.
Correct.
The first one being is it the nightjar, the turtle? I think about the turtledove. So
turtledove is first of all.
Okay, well, let's play this little bit of bird song, and this is a species that is now no longer.
It was at Risley Moss at one time, and the moss lands in good numbers, and the turtledove, it suffers terribly on migration, the slaughter in southern Europe, but not bred for a number of years that I know of anyway.
Okay, so this is a piece of bird song that you won't be hearing in this area anymore.
Turtledove.
So that's the turtledove playing there. Is that quite a distinct sound? That, I mean,
it is. Now you can listen to this from a gramophone record, but to be in the middle of a mossland area alone with a turtledove above your head, with that lovely purring sound, that's completely magical.
And you've obviously witnessed that in days gone by.
One time in days gone by, back in the old days.
Yeah. So how long have they been extinct from this area?
There are still one or two pairs in the northwest, but they're seriously depleted, and probably happened in the last 20 years. I know they were originally in the 1980s, definitely.
I'd say, I mean, I've been birding for probably about 8 years, and both of these sounds, both the turtledove and the nightjar, these are sounds I've never heard.
Right.
Never, ever.
And that's why it's so important to record them. And
Well, one of the things I'd like to ask you, Paul, I mean, we're talking about these species endangered. You're the preservation officer of the club. What is your role, sort of, as a preservation officer?
To take an interest in all the areas in the locality which may or may not be under threat. We have quite a good number in the Wigan Borough of sites of biological importance, which come under a special classification as recognised sites of biological importance, and yet that doesn't stop them being under threat of development. Certainly
at the moment, there's a lot of green space under threat, isn't there?
That's right.
In Warrington and other towns as well.
That's right. Yeah.
What about in Warrington? Woolston Eyes, is that an area? Certainly an area of great interest, I would have thought.
It is. It's an area. It's a particular, very, very special place, and you access the main part of the reserve over a bridge which is under lock and key, so you have to be a member. But anybody can apply to join.
Right.
And there are, I know, quite a lot of L.O.S. members who are members at Woolston Eyes.
Now, Dave, you were pivotal, or you were certainly involved in getting Risley Moss marked as an area of...
Well, the Society, we started in 1971, and one of the first things that happened was that, in fact, I read the newsletter report very briefly. This is the newsletter which went out in March of 1973. It's about Risley Moss. The Warrington Newtown Nature Conservation Group was set up in 1971 to report to the Newtown Development Corporation on the natural history value of certain sites which will eventually be incorporated in the new town. This society accepted the responsibility of reporting on the ornithological aspect in the spring and summer of 1972 of Risley Moss. The study was submitted the following year, and it contained a checklist describing the status of the birds of Risley Moss, a map showing the distribution of each of the 43 breeding species, and observations on general aspects of setting up a nature reserve there. Now that was commissioned by the Newtown people to a local society via Dr. Rolf Thomason of Padgate College. That doesn't happen these days. When developers appear on the scene, they will bring in outside ecologists could be anywhere in the country who don't really know the places.
Might not be as passionate, or maybe.
Certainly won't be passionate.
Not about the local area, maybe.
Yeah. But Risley Moss, Warrington's got Risley Moss, Silver Lane and Woolston Eyes, 3 terrific sites. And we're bringing now the word biodiversity. Woolston Eyes is wetland. Risley Moss is, as the name implies, mossland. Silver Lane is predominantly grassland with trees. Now, the RSPB, from time to time, amends the list of species which are in danger. And the red list is where species are critically endangered, in serious decline. And there are 8 species on this list which apply to this area. Grey partridge, lapwing, cuckoo, skylark, grasshopper warbler, yellow wagtail, linnet and yellowhammer.
There's some names there that I recognise as well. Well, cuckoo certainly, but...
they have one thing in common, Andy.
Yeah.
They all depend on grassland, on open grassland or scrubby areas. And these are the places which developers look at with glee. They are deemed to be expendable.
But you as a society make sure that...
we try to defend them,
We try to do that.
You're up against big vested interests, of course, and I mean one of the best areas in Warrington, Silver Lane, which is an old rubbish tip which has been transformed into wonderful grassland full of skylarks at the moment.
Yeah.
That is earmarked for development under the HS2 project.
So there's obviously a lot of like-minded people out there. I was astonished, maybe naively, to know that you have 90 odd paid up members.
97.
90, almost 100. That is some really good going.
For a small town, it's a very, very active society. And
I mean, do you have some members from outside town as well?
Yeah, there's members who come from further away, certainly.
Some from Warrington,
I would think so. Certainly some from Edmondson, that direction.
Great stuff. And
One of the things we were talking about, lots of interests. I mean, you are adults. What about children? Because that's going to be the future. It's the children that are going to actually either be bereft of wildlife, or we've got to save it for them and they've got to look after it. How do you encourage children?
You've hit the nail on the head. There are children now in Warrington who never have and never will hear a cuckoo. There are people in Warrington, probably in 10, 20 years' time, who may never hear a skylark sing because their habitats are being taken willy-nilly. And you've got groups in Warrington who are trying to resist this onslaught of the countryside. We know there's a housing problem, but surely people have got to take into consideration the future.
And nature.
What do children inherit from us? Bricks and mortar? Or do we do something better than that? Do we enhance existing habitats and retain these species, retain the cuckoo, retain the skylark and the grey partridge and the lapwing?
Strike the right balance rate, basically, isn't it? Go on, Paul.
We do also, specifically about children, we do have several members of the society who are teachers in various stages of working or retirement, and they're involved in something called the Young Birders Group.
Yeah, I've seen that, and a youth development team as well you've got, haven't you, there?
Yes, they get together and they plan lessons and they go and give presentations in primary schools around the local area.
Brilliant.
Superb.
But you're doing a great job.
You mentioned where do people come from?
Yes.
Andy. Well, in the mid-70s, we had a committee of 14 people. 6 from Leigh, 2 from Chorley, 2 from Radcliffe near Bolton, 1 from Eccles, 1 from Bolton, 1 from Horwich, 1 from Billinge, but nothing from Warrington. And that's astonishing, really.
Yeah.
I don't know why it came about.
But, like you say, the area now, your recording area, does encompass a large chunk of Warrington, really. Everything north of the Ship Canal.
It does. It always has done.
Yeah, I'd suggest then anybody out there that's interested, get in touch with you very, very quickly.
Absolutely.
And how do they get in touch? Website?
The addresses are on the website. There's a Facebook group. You can...
Leigh Ornithological Society, search for that.
Leigh Ornithological... L.O.S. photography group, or Leigh Ornithological Society, yes. You can ask to become members of those groups and you'll be allowed in very easily. OK,
now you mentioned there about the skylark being an endangered speise. There's another piece of music coming up now. I think this might be yours, Paul, one of your choices.
Yes, it is.
The Lark Ascending. Why have you chosen this?
Well, obvious reasons, really. It's a wonderful piece of music by Vaughan Williams from the 20th century. And it just... The violin in it is doing an impression of a skylark ascending.
It really is a wonderful piece of music.
It's nowhere near as beautiful, of course, as being out there listening to a skylark, but
it's getting there.
It gets there.
Yeah. Early in the morning, Paul, is a time that members of the Leigh Ornithology Group often set out on field trips.
That's very true, yes. Once a month, roughly, from September through to May. Either on a Saturday or a Sunday, it varies. We do set out variable time. It depends how far we're going, of course. Usually about 8 o'clock, sometimes a bit earlier.
And are these trips all in the area where you typically record, or can they go beyond there?
No, they will go beyond. Okay. Very often they'll go beyond.
I was looking at a list. I think your season has just finished, hasn't it?
That's right, yeah.
But the season that's just gone, you've been to places like Little, Walden Moss, Hilbre Island in the Wirral.
That was very adventurous, Hilbre Island.
Yeah.
A trek across the sands.
I was going to say, did he get back before the tide came in?
Well, I mean, Paul Pennington, who organises these for us, he had to consult the tide tables very carefully before that one.
Many, many moons ago, I used to work for the council of YTS when I left school. And there was a guy there who was taking the mick. He actually had been unwell, but he could have been back at work, but he went out for the day with his family. And I think he went... It might have been the Wirral, but he got stranded. And he ended up being on the news when he should have been in work, because he was rescued. So it's a funny story. But you get far and wide, Ainsdale Beach, Lump Meadows, Burton Mere, Wetlands, Old Moor.
We've even been over the other side of the Pennines now and again,
Really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, goodness me. So, if you remember, it cost how much to become a member?
To be a member. How much does it cost to become a member, Dave? Where's Brian Fawcett when you need him?
I'm not sure, Paul. I don't pay anymore.
Is it £15 a year?
I think it's £15 for adults, but I think you get a special discount for family membership, I think, don't you?
You've done your research, Andy.
I have. We'll look it up. I think it's £20 for family, and for that there's 10 indoor meetings. Am I right in thinking that you have lectures as well and people come in to do talks?
We have meetings on a Friday night. Again, it's September. The season is September through to May, same as the field trips, and once a month.
So the fee of the joining fee there, though, the yearly fee of £15 for an adult, £10 a junior, £20 for a family, gives you access to those meetings.
Access to all that. Having said that, you don't have to be a member to come on the field trips or to come to the meetings.
Oh, you come as a guest, can you?
We do appreciate a little donation to the society if you come to a meeting and you're not a member, but it's not essential.
Okay, so how do you get coach trips there, or is it you make your own way?
We some people make their own way and meet us there. We always meet up in a group at the strategic car park in Leigh called Doctor's Nook.
Okay.
And we'll car share as appropriate.
Have a convoy.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I've been really impressed by looking on your website is your bi-monthly newsletters.
Yeah.
And you were saying before, Dave, and our photography, and you were actually saying that Paul's a brilliant photographer. Some of the pictures in that newsletter are absolutely out of this world, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
It's amazing what you can do with modern equipment. I don't claim to be anything particularly special, really, but there are people who dedicate a lot more time than I do to it.
Yeah. So and is that free to members as well? The newsletter. The newsletter,
yes.
Yeah. Super. Sorry, Dave.
Yeah, the age of publishing has advanced terrifically. The first newsletters, it was my responsibility as secretary to collect information from members, to write summaries, to use wax stencils to type out a report for January or February or whatever it was, notices about functions coming up, and then distribute them, print them and distribute them. And that was a really arduous task, but it was a labour of love in effect, giving people information about how important places near Leigh and Warrington and Bolton, how they really are. When you touched upon trips then, in the 70s and 80s, I don't like harping back all the time, Paul, we used to have a 53-seater.
Right.
One in spring, one in autumn.
A charabang.
A charabang, yeah. And
a chara.
The spring trips would be to places which were very different from our locality. So we'd go to the White Peak area of Derbyshire, the Trough of Bowland, Delgarrog in Wales and Bolton Abbey. In autumn, we chiefly went to Spurn, which is a big migration spot the other side of Hull. And if there are any former abusive pupils listening in tonight, got a little tale about one calamity on one of the trips. I was leading a visit to Spurn, and a teacher from Busey School, Phil Massey, he was taking his trip to Snowdonia. We were both going to leave from Leigh Parish Church. We were going at 7:30. Phil was going at 8 o'clock.
Okay.
We had 53 seats, but only 52 people had turned up on our bus, and I knew there was one person who we didn't know was going to come and pay when he got on board. We set up, and suddenly there's a chap comes running along and jumps on our bus and sits down, and he enjoys himself. He had a chat with the person he's talking to, can't remember who it was. But he suddenly looks up and he sees a sign at the side of the road, Goole and Grimsby and Immingham in Lincolnshire. He says, "Where are we going?" He's one of the Snowdonia men, one of Phil Massey's Snowdonia men, thinking he's in the mountains of Wales, and he's a goner.
And it couldn't be any flatter than Goole.
But he said after it, that's one of the best days I've ever had out. He loved it.
He never went
but we
up
never saw him
mountain,
again.
I suppose.
Never saw him again.
Yeah, one of the things that we were talking about before the news was that your roles within the organisation. It's a large society, nearly almost 100 members. What other roles are there in the organisation that people may want to, or may be interested in, for instance?
Well, every organisation needs a chairman, doesn't it, Dave?
It does. Yeah, David Shawcross is the name, and he is the the rock of the society, the driving force.
Okay.
I think every society needs somebody, a leader, and he is Mr. L.O.S, without a shadow of a doubt.
And how long has David been involved with the society?
I think he's had the role of chairman pushing 30 years now.
Really?
I think so, yeah.
It's quite, I mean, I'm a chairman of a local history society, and it's a demanding role, but you do need good people around you as well, don't you? You know, secretary, I always find the secretary I've got there at the History Society and programme secretary, and you need a good team around you, don't you? So, I mean, I've noticed you've got a vice chairman there as well.
We have, yes, Tony Bishop.
Yeah.
Yep, another stalwart.
So I made a mistake, Andy. I was secretary from 71 until 1988, and I took on too much. And it dawned on me in the January of 1985, when I had 4 commitments. I was teaching at Busey. I had a full-time job and a family. I had, in that January 1985, to write a newsletter, an annual report for the Society, the Greater Manchester Bird Report, and I was putting the finishing touches to the Birds of Pennington Flash book, which I wrote, and which went out in 85. And I just thought then, I can't cope with this.
Yeah.
And the best thing that happened when I left then was that people took individual responsibilities, and the society has just flourished.
Because your role was basically split with other people taking on elements of it, I guess. Because I know you've got someone there who edits. You've got an editor, I guess, he does the newsletter. Or Joan, she does the newsletter.
Joan's listening, she said.
Oh, hello. Hello, Joan.
She managed to find us somehow.
Brilliant. Conservation's yourself, Paul, there. Angela's your secretary.
That's right.
A couple of treasurers.
We're going to get into trouble if there's anybody we don't mention.
And everyone at home who knows me. That's what you need to say at the
end. There's one Warringtonian,
right,
Andy, a young lad from the 70s called John Timon.
Okay.
Who lives in Warrington. He's still a lather.
Yeah.
And he's a wonderful photographer.
Yeah.
And if John's listening, get back to the Flash this week, John, and we'll have a chat tomorrow morning, preferably.
You've got the Young Birders Club there as well, annual reports to do. But I know, Paul, you also represent the society on an outside body as well, don't you? The Bickershaw. Or is that Dave? Sorry, that's Dave.
Part of my role actually as conservation officer is to attend Bickershaw steering group meetings along with Dave Shallcross, our chairman. Bickershaw is a really interesting area for us. It's trying very hard to become a country park.
Okay.
It's the old spoil tips of Bickershaw colliery, basically, and some surrounding farmland.
Yeah.
So it's land which was really poisoned, but it's becoming the most amazing resource for nature and wildlife. This goes into the realms of botany as well, because on these sort of poisoned areas you get particular species and varieties of plants appearing which actually deal with some of the heavy elements in the soil. They'll actually remove things like selenium and cadmium from the soil. Just plants, things like ragwort and stuff, which seems to actually be of no value, but it's doing a job there.
Yeah, and bringing it back to health.
Yeah, I think Paul's probably mentioned biodiversity. The more habitats you've got, the greater the variety of wildlife that occupies each place. Bickershaw is predominantly grassland and reed bed, and some woodland. Pennington Flash, on the other hand, is main water and wooded areas. And there's a smaller flash called Lightshaw, very shallow, very different. But collectively, you've got within half a mile of each other terrific lists of species that you can come across. Not just birds, but the whole lot.
One of the things I'd like to ask is, if someone wanted to take up bird watching, what gear would they need? What would you suggest?
I think the most essential thing to start with is a decent pair of binoculars. Obviously you can see birds with your eyes, but you can't get near enough to them to really recognise the different species unless you're at a bird feeder or something. So you need a decent pair of binoculars, and that means probably spending over £100. But you can get a good pair of binoculars for not that much more than that.
Good.
People who spend half their lives doing it probably want to spend quite a lot more money than that. But,
so what magnification do you go for?
It's always a compromise. If you the key thing with any optical instrument is the size of the lens at the end, the objective lens that lets the light in. So you want a big objective lens to let the light in, but the bigger objective you have, the heavier the thing will be. So if you have a 32 or 42 millimeter objective lens and not too much magnification, something like about 8 or maximum 10, they are classified as something like 8 by 32 or 8 by 42 usually.
Okay.
That would be about right.
So, Paul, you got into bird watching, well, you joined the society about 7 years ago.
About 8 years ago, I suppose.
You used to be a GP in Leigh, is that right?
I did, yeah.
So, did you do bird watching then? Is that one of your pastimes? Or is it something?
I've always been interested in the natural world, but the pathway that I came down was through hill walking, really. I've always been, still am to an extent, a passionate hill walker. And when you're out in the hills, you do see birds from time to time, not perhaps as many as you might want to. But there were many years when I was a hill walker when I couldn't even tell you whether it was a meadow pipit or a skylark, to my shame now.
Right.
But I suppose it was through... I would really go back to a trip to the Hebrides, to the Outer Hebrides, where we booked, as a result of watching programmes like Springwatch, we thought, well, we'd like a day out with a wildlife guide.
Okay.
And we found this fabulous guy called Steve Duffield on the Isle of Uist, who took us out for a day in his car. And almost every time he changed gear, there seemed to be a new bird appearing. And, he could just recognise things just like that.
Wonderful.
A fantastic experience.
So you've built your knowledge up over the years. But I think it's important to point out, obviously you've both got a lot of knowledge now about birds, but the society is open to anybody really that's just interested and wanted to take the hobby or their interest a little bit further.
And it's a fantastic way of getting more experience, particularly coming on field trips, because you'll be walking around with people who know a lot more and who can recognise birds just by the sound of their song.
What's your most memorable sighting of a bird or flock of birds? Or
oh gosh, for
is that
me,
a tough one?
My only moment of fame so far happened very near Warrington, actually, at a place called Silver Lane, which we were talking about earlier, which used to be a refuse tip. And I came across one September 2 or 3 years ago. I came across a bird called a red-backed shrike there, which is quite rare in this country, and particularly rare over this side of the country. They're usually seen over in the east.
Okay.
The great thing about that was that I managed to recognise it and to report it.
Did you get a picture?
Got very excited. Got a couple of pictures, yes. Got very excited about it, but I had another commitment, so I had to leave.
Oh.
This was a Saturday. I had to leave by about midday. Unfortunately, 2 or 3 more birders came in the afternoon and managed to find the thing again. So, not just me. But the next morning, this was September, remember. The next morning, apparently, it was very, very foggy. And apparently the word had gone out, and about 30 or 40 birders turned up at Silver Lane, all parked up in this cramped little space by the roundabout there, and went down this rather scrubby path, and all lined up in the dense fog, and the wretched bird didn't even turn up. So
it's like going fishing and not catching a fish, isn't it?
So it was only there as far as it was only passing through for a day. But
what about you, David? Have you
another coincidence? Paul mentioned a September 12 o'clock incident. I had one from Pennington Flash. One September day there was a terrific gale, and the Leach's petrel, that's an oceanic species, would have been blown into the Flash, and the wind drove it towards me, and it ended up about 10 or 12 feet away. I was filming at that time, but I had a dilemma because it was dinner time-ish, and Phil Massey, the teacher I mentioned from Busey, was going to pick me up and take me to watch Bolton Wanderers. We had season tickets. So I've got this Leach's petrel, a wonderful, wonderful creature. They get the name from St. Peter, who was supposed to walk on the water.
Right.
They pitter-patter over the water. And he was there. And thankfully, what saved my bacon was I ran out of film.
Right.
So we still got to see the football match, and we still saw the Leach's petrel.
So, we were talking off air then about how passionate you are, both Dave and Paul, about the green spaces here in the northwest, Warrington, Leigh area. In fact, the whole country, really, aren't you?
We are. It's an assault on the countryside that's it's a very, very serious concern to everybody. The loss of green space, the misuse of green space, the gay abandon which developers come along and just take over. And I'm a firm believer in local democracy, that people who elect councillors, those councillors should represent the people who elect them, not toe some party line. That's a starter. That could open a complete can of worms. We're lucky at Bickershaw, which Paul mentioned earlier on, because the person who was doing the master plan for Bickershaw, he listened and he made changes. He accommodated every single interest. But many a time, an outsider will come in with a plan. It's cut and dried. And you've no choice. You either nod your head in agreement or you shake it in disapproval. I think the assault on our countryside, I've got to mention the word brownfield sites here, sites which are considered by many people to be expendable. They're wonderful wildlife places, but they offer two things. Not only are they valuable for wildlife, but public recreation. People need to have on the doorsteps places to wander, for physical health, for mental health, for spiritual health. If you take that away, it's no good saying to somebody in Warrington, if you want to go to the countryside, you can go to Delamere. We should try our best, as in Busey, keep wildlife sites as close to centres of population as possible.
I know it's something one of the talks I do as part of the History Society is on one of the former mayors, William Beament, first mayor of Warrington, and he was an advocate at the time for public spaces, green spaces. That's when all the parks came in.
And
Bennett's Rec. Arthur Bennett came later.
That's right.
We fought hard for these green spaces, didn't we? Obviously the population is getting bigger though, and people need places to live, don't they? So I guess a balance has to be struck. But what you're saying is, and to be fair to the council, I think they've proven that they do listen. They proved that they listen with the libraries, didn't they? But what you're saying is, don't sit back and do nothing. If you're passionate about it, get involved.
I think one of the dangers is, as we touched on earlier, that when the developments are under consideration, then the people who are brought in to look at the environment are experts from somewhere else.
Yeah.
And there doesn't seem to be any sense of consulting the local people who have the local knowledge, which is societies like ours and people who know the local botany and so on. I mean, I was really struck by what Dave was saying earlier about what happened with Risley Moss. That in the early 1970s, the L.O.S. was consulted in a very, very real way about Risley Moss, and partly through L.O.S. that Risley Moss came into existence as a naturism. I mean, if only things would happen like that nowadays, but it doesn't happen.
But I guess at the same time, though, Warrington New Town was a period when there was a lot of building in the town. And I guess then, I was born in 1967, so I was very young when that was happening. But there would have been some green space lost as well, I guess.
Oh,
at that time.
Sort of birch wood.
Yeah.
The whole of Birchwood was just open land.
So there's definitely a balance to be struck, but it's sad if, like you say, well, you've mentioned before, we played some bird song, didn't we, of some birds that are no longer with us because some of this green space is going.
Obviously, we need the housing. We know that. It's perhaps sometimes debatable exactly how much we need, but I mean, we had a meeting with our local Leigh MP recently, and we were touching on the fact that in Leigh, at least, the town centre and the areas around the town centre,
the spaces to build,
are dying.
Yeah.
And yet we're talking about encroaching on more and more of the green space that's around the outside of the town.
I know in Warrington here we're getting some town centre living coming on, aren't we?
Yeah. But, some apartments not far from the studio down the road that are being built at the moment.
Yeah. So I guess, as you say, the thing is, get out there and make sure your voice is heard.
Yeah, but I do think, Andy, that the voice of local people who know sites, who value sites, who love particular sites, they should carry far more weight than they do at present. Paul's just touched on it then. Outsiders coming in never clapped eyes on some of these places before, but what they see on a brief visit or searching some data or some information bank somewhere, they determine what's going to happen. I'm not trying to be too critical. Well, I am. I'm deliberately critical. I'm deliberately critical of a system where people are ignored, where local people are ignored. Can I give you the classic example, Andy, of stupidity in this context? It concerns a nightingale.
Okay.
It's a little story about nightingale and what the developer proposed to do because of the loss of nightingale habitat. I'm going to read this. There's a place in Kent called Lodge Hill, and it's considered by the RSPB to be perhaps the most important breeding site for nightingales in the United Kingdom. Since the 1960s, the population has declined by 90%. It's on its way out. But this Lodge Hill site was designated a site of special scientific interest by Natural England on account of its ancient woodland, perhaps going back beyond Norman times, and its breeding nightingales. Medway Council gave the green light to development, and this was what the developers said. How can we solve this problem of displacing an iconic species on the brink of extinction in our country? Developers behind plans for 5,000 houses in Medway have suggested moving a nightingale population 14 miles away after their habitat was protected last year. They're going to shift them.
Are they? What on earth are they going to do?
But the nightingale, it winters in West Africa, Senegal, Gambia. Mm-hmm. They migrate at night. When they arrive to Lodge Hill, according to this master plan, there's no place, it's gone. But a site's been provided at Shoebury-in-Ess across the Thames in Essex, 14 miles away. The director of the developers comes in with this final comment in, I think it's Kent Online. We will provide a purpose-built larger area of land than the birds have over here, which is suitable to accommodate the current nightingale population. Now, there's an assumption here. Who tells the nightingales to move from Lodge Hill to Shoebury-in-Ess?
Yeah. Nobody gives them a map, do they?
No, but Noddy, Big Ears and the Wooden Top could have come across anything as ridiculous as this. Yeah. And they've got their nerve to call it a master plan. It isn't a plan, it's not masterful, it's scandalous, and yet people who make these ridiculous comments about our environment, they can get away with it. It's a staggering situation. The nightingale, the iconic songster of all songsters, on the blink, and we can't protect it properly. The RSPB, I think, have negotiated a high degree of protection. It's a good job the RSPB exists.
It's a wonder it didn't say there's a place for them in Berkeley Square.
Exactly.
Bobby Darin sang that. We should have played that earlier, shouldn't we? Yeah.
Well, they can't read English and they can't understand English, so they find their way to Shoebury-in-Ess is one of life's great mysteries.
You mentioned the RSPB there, and Martin May's a place I go to on occasion. Did they do a lot of good work then?
Which is Martin Muir is actually the Wildlife and Wetland Trust.
Right.
Which is another good organisation.
It's not the RSPB.
Leighton Moss. I go to Leighton Moss.
Leighton Moss is RSPB.
Which is up in Silverdale, North Lancs.
So the RSPB, what can, if people feel as passionate as you do about this, Dave, and obviously you, Paul, what organisations can they join? Do you focus locally or is it
Leigh
national?
Ornithological Society, of course.
Or the RSPB. Anybody can join the RSPB. Nice magazine. Yeah. Access to sites throughout the country. Wonderful places.
British Trust for Ornithology is another one.
But the Leigh Society.
L.O.S.
Yeah. Start there and you can point people in the right direction.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Onto the serious subject there of green spaces. You had a point to make, Paul, didn't you?
Yeah, so I just felt that we needed to perhaps get across that we're not just a group of retired ageing men who do tick lists of birds and want to keep the sparrows happy and the blue tits and so on, but this is a much more significant thing going on here. This question of loss of green space, and it gets extremely serious, and it's to do with the survival of the human species on this planet, and it's to do with everything that David Attenborough bats on about and gets us all passionate about. And when we're losing local green spaces, we're losing biodiversity. Biodiversity is just a long word for the huge assortment of different species that you can see, and we've talked about how you get distracted by butterflies and dragonflies and all sorts of creepy crawlies and the botany and the wonderful orchids and the flowers. The world is an amazing place full of thousands and thousands of different species. I was looking up something I took a picture of the other day called the longhorn beetle. Beautiful little beetle that I saw at Pennington Flash, and I took quite a reasonably decent picture of it. There's 20,000 species of longhorn beetle.
Really?
And I've only ever seen one.
Yeah.
20,000 species in the world. But how are we going to keep them all if we keep losing the green space? And as Dave said, you can talk about mitigation for stuff that's lost. You take away a pond that has great crested newts in it, which is the classic thing for building sites. So you create another pond somewhere else. But that artificial pond is never going to be the same as the one that's taken away.
No.
And the bricks that you put in your houses for the swifts to nest in, if you're lucky, they're not going to provide the accommodation which they're used to having. And the nightingales are not going to look at the signpost and go to Shoebury Ness when they should be in Kent.
It's a beautiful world out there, isn't it?
It is.
That's a terrific comment. That's wonderful what you just said, Paul.
There's a classic one as well when we talk about moving a species from one place to another. You get rid of one place where that species stays, you move the species to another, so they say. It possibly doesn't settle quite, it's not exactly the same. But what other species have you lost?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
That's the other thing. You've not lost one species, you've lost all the other biodiversity.
Yes, it's the little longhorn beetles that nobody knows about.
Yeah.
But Paul mentioned a pond which we dug out centuries ago to provide a constant supply of water for cattle, for example. The little ecosystems. And it's no good somebody saying, I can dig a big hole in the ground and fill it full of water, and you've also got a pond. Ecosystems take years and years to develop. I expect there could be some people listening tonight who think that we're a couple of NIMBYs. You've heard the expression NIMBY, not in my backyard. We aren't NIMBYs, we're super NIMBYs, because we'll defend inappropriate developments anywhere.
Okay.
That's the end game, Andy. We're not in it for personal gain. We're in it because we cherish our environment, and not just for ourselves, for future generations. I said an hour ago, what answer will we give if some child asks, what did a skylight sound like? And with no answer, it'd have all gone. It'd have all gone through habitat.
Okay. And of course, open spaces. Paul, former GP.
Yep.
The health benefits of getting out there into
physical
these open
health,
spaces,
mental health
is there. And Dave, teacher, you used to teach at Busey High.
Busey.
Yeah. What did you teach?
History.
So I guess looking back at the history of the society tonight's been right up your street.
Yeah.
This is our final section of the programme, and probably one of the most difficult for any guest that we have on the programme. It's your favourites. Now, let's start with Dave. Your favourite poet, Dave. Your favourite poet.
It's a tie. Tom Durkin, Frank Horrocks.
Well, there we go.
And this is in all seriousness. The poetry comes from the soul, comes from the heart, and it's about the pleasures I share with them.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. And yourself now, Paul?
Well, this is a very difficult one. I'm going to go for John Keats, mainly because of his wonderful poem, Ode to a Nightingale.
Yeah. That's a good choice.
And having a smartphone on me, I can actually quote a little bit of it.
Please do.
Oh, for a draught of vintage that hath been cooled a long age in the deep delved earth, tasting of flora and the country green, dance and the Provençal song and sunburnt mirth. Oh, for a beaker full of the warm south, full of the true, the blushful hippocrene, with beaded bubbles winking at the brim and purple stained mouth, that I might drink and leave the world unseen, and with thee fade away into the forest dim.
Super. Well,
magnificent.
Super. Perfect. Right, now, Dave, a painter.
Bruegel.
Really?
Painted peasant's wedding. I have a big peasant's wedding. It was a wedding present, and it's It appeals to me very much. The common man.
Right. Painter.
Caravaggio, if you don't mind.
And he's not a footballer. Right, David. Bird.
Swallow.
Paul.
Spotted flycatcher.
There we go. Now, book. David, book.
It's a book about a journey across North America by Mary Lewis and William Clegg. It's called Undaunted Courage.
There we go.
An adventure story and a half.
Right, and yours, Paul.
Can I be very, very unoriginal and go for Lord of the Rings?
Oh. And right, Phil.
Shawshank Redemption.
Good one.
That's a good one, that, yeah. Phil.
Perhaps not very well known, a film called A Beautiful Mind.
Oh,
yes,
with,
yes.
The guy from Australia was in it,
Yes.
wasn't he? Yeah.
What's his name?
Owns the rugby club. Russell Crowe.
Yeah,
Crowe.
exactly.
Yeah, it's good.
That's a mathematician.
Now, finally, and most topical, what's your favourite bird watching venue?
Pennington Flash.
And yours, Paul.
Oh, it's a tough choice, this one.
He's going for Bickershaw.
Bickershaw Country Park.
Well, there you go. Well, thanks for that.
I wonder why.
Super. Right, guys, you've been fascinating guests. Remind us once again, if anybody wants to join the society, is interested in, you said they can come along to some of the lectures or as guests as well.
Have a look on the
What's
website.
The process?
Have a look on the website and look and see when the meetings are and come along to a meeting or get in touch via the Facebook groups.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you. Right. The guests on next week's show, we have some students from Ludovico Studio coming in. They're a drama group from Warrington, fantastic group led by Darren Jeffries. They're coming in to perform some monologues that they've written with some writers in anticipation of performing them at Stockton Heath Festival. So they'll be on the show next week. So we'll look forward to that. We want to dedicate the show, as we said at the start of the hour, or the start of 2 hours ago, to the former member, one of the founding members of the original group that led to the Leigh Ornithological Society, which was Tom Durkin.
Tom Edmondson.
Tom Edmondson.
Tom Edmondson. Please, Andy.
Yeah. And it was it 75 years ago?
Well, he wrote a little piece, a little paragraph in 1948.
Okay.
February 1948. And just listen to this and think about the situation today. The history of our countryside is a sordid chapter, better forgotten. And then he comes on to what we talked about earlier, the destruction of open spaces. He uses the word disfiguration. Some remains, some countryside remains, but that is earmarked for disfiguration, as a lack of principles and aesthetic appreciation still remain very much in vogue.
Well,
Tom Edmondson, 1948.
Lovely. Let's dedicate that to Tom. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.